I've known depression since I was 16. Sometimes, suddenly, without warning, and for reasons that are entirely inscrutable to me, inside the palace of my mind, the floor just falls away, and I'm floating. It's hard to move like that, to wade through the air with no grounding, no purchase, no connection to the place. Everything feels distant, hard to reach, hazy. It's like watching a vibrant melodrama with music and voices and passion and life, but without sound. A movie on mute, or food without flavor, or... Again, my words, my language, my lexicon fails me. What happens when my connections to meaning are severed? What's left? What's it like to be a person who's adrift? He's not a robot. He has emotions. He feels sad, empty, and hopeless. Sometimes he feels, sometimes I feel, like without those connections, it's not all that obvious that anything is worth doing. And that, to me, is the worst of it. That profound lack of motivation. Something that we, human beings, are supposed to be able to take for granted. When it's gone, there's just this thick, heavy, deafening silence. It's very, very scary. Thank you, Hyperbole and a Half creator Ali Broche, for the most accurate and erudite and certainly the funniest description of depression and suicidality from the inside that I've ever read. It helped me. Thank you. I think maybe that I love that comic so much in part because it circumvents the language problem. The experience of reading the text and looking at the pictures is richer than the experience of just reading the text alone. To explain depression, I don't think words are enough, because moods are more than just words. Welcome to Chapter 5. I'm sort of on display here. My major depressive episodes have always been relatively mild, easy to tolerate, and treatable. I am immensely grateful for that. But they're recurrent, so they meet the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder, which is a mood disorder. The DSM-5 divvies up the mood disorders into 2 chapters: bipolar and related disorders, and depressive disorders. We could spend a year talking about each one of these perplexing creatures. Diseases, disorders, boxes. But across these 2 chapters, one disorder, one box, weighs in way heavier than the rest. Way heavier. Colloquially, people in the know sometimes refer to depression as the common cold of mental illness. Our best estimates suggest that something like 6% of us meet the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder within a given year. 1 in 17 of us. Across the lifespan, it's more like 1 in 6. You know, or maybe you are someone who's touched the abyss. It gets worse. It's getting worse. The common cold of mental illness is spreading. These prevalence numbers have been increasing over the last half-century. 18 to 29-year-olds right now are already more likely to have experienced depression than people over 60, despite the fact that people over 60 have been alive for 2 to 3 times as long. This is an important chapter in my story, selfishly, because it's how I best connect to abnormal psychology, but it's also important because this is your fight. This is our fight. The World Health Organization projects that by 2030, the amount of disability and death related to depression will surpass any other condition. Suicides are now more common than auto accidents. We don't talk about this enough. This is a problem for our generation to solve. Quickly. Please. This is too much. These videos are always theatrical, but we've probably crossed over even my line. I've got a job to do here. I'm your tour guide. We're in the borderlands of sanity. We're supposed to study the wildlife, mental illnesses, depression, bipolar disorder. How do they work? Relative to last week, dissociative disorders, I think that a lot of people will assume that moods are a cakewalk, a lot easier to talk about and wrap your head around. Moods? Oh, moods are easy. Moods are like one thing, like I'm in a sad mood, or a happy mood, or a rage quit mood. People think they have words for depression. Dejected, blue, down, melancholy. But personally, when I'm down in the well, those words don't really fit. depression's more than that. According to Jonathan Rottenberg, psychological scientist and author of the exceptionally lucid book, The Depths, The Evolutionary Origins of the Depression Epidemic, it's obvious that it should be the case that I'm struggling for words. Because moods aren't just emotions stretched out over time. They're much more interesting than that. Weirder, deeper, deceptively complicated. I'll explain. Actually, Jonathan Rottenberg will explain, because I've added a chapter from his book to this week's to-do list. But first, more jargon, definitions and symptom checklists, the usual, in Noba's mood disorder overview. Also a podcast that I'm hoping will drive home the scope of this epidemic. Or pandemic. Then I'll be back to finish my story. I've slipped into darkness maybe 24 times across the course of my life over the last 15 years. I'm not there now while I'm recording this, though I have been there within the past year. Thanks for listening, because it really does mean something to me to be able to talk about this. Onward. Melancholy is such a recognizable state of being that the ancient Greeks and Romans believed it was one of 4 fundamental personality types, one of the 4 humors, these fictional fluids that run in rivers throughout our bodies and make us who we are. There were sanguine people, choleric people, phlegmatic people, and melancholic people. The amount of each nasty goo in your body was supposed to determine how much of each trait you possessed, and so your profile was you. It blows my mind. These people had the same brains that you and I have. It really is the case that if you could take a time machine back, say 2,500 years, they're just people like you and I coming up with brilliance and some fucking ridiculous shit. We are probably in the same situation. But you can tell the difference. I teach a whole class about this, the psychology of pseudoscience. Quick plug. Oh man, I'm way off on a tangent. Okay, this will be black and white, maybe even at the end. Okay, back to the thing.